before we get into the second of the 5 stratospheric laws of success, let's look back at this first law for a moment. Now, we had used a story to share this law, and we want to make sure that you're clear on why we chose this story and that it made sense to you. So, Jim and his son went fishing, and when Jim was telling his story, all you did was think about the time when you went fishing. Your story is what you want to talk about. Our meaning was your friends will start to disappear if all you do is always talk about you. The law of value states that you have to give more in value than you take in payment. So if you're giving no value to your friendship or family, but taking massive amounts of value from them, there's a good chance you'll lose them. Now, on to the next law, the law of compensation. Your income is determined by how many people you serve and how well you serve them. Here we go, back on the word serve. This law is a simple law to understand and apply in your life. The more service you provide to your clients or company, the more you will get right back. Yes, that is in theory correct, but there's another part of this law that you need to be aware of. If you give all you have to client A, you might get it back from client B. This law is really interesting because let's look at it. We have had people share stories with us where they were given all they had to one company and never had much come back in return. Yet, not too long after, they were approached by another company, and they made them an offer that they simply couldn't refuse. So would you say that there's another part to this equation that you probably should be aware of? Absolutely. If you give everything to company A, you might get it back from company B. There are many different explanations for this law, so we thought we'd share a few with you, seeing as we all operate under a different plane of understanding, so the more you change your perspective of something, the more that thing changes. Robert Kiyosaki described the law of compensation like this. Returns are minimal in spite of a massive effort at the start. Yet, returns can be massive with minimal effort over time. Brian Tracy says, the law of compensation is another restatement of the law of sowing and reaping. It says that you will always be compensated for your efforts and for your contribution, whatever it is, however much or however little. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, each person is compensated in like manner for which he or she has contributed. Mr. Emerson also calls this law the law of laws. So let's look at Mr. Tracy's explanation for a minute. Here is a great explanation of this very powerful law. Sowing and reaping. Interesting words, I think, no? What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word sowing and reaping? We think of farmers, crops. They sow the crops, nurture them, feed them, and when the crop is ready, they harvest them and reap the rewards of their effort. Now, most people want an instantaneous result. That's just the way the mass of the population in the world seem to operate, but the farmer is the greatest representation of this law. So let's dissect the farmer to close out this video, shall we? Just like the farmer planting his crops, you need to understand what you have done in the past is what's controlled the results you're getting right now. The seeds you've planted in the past is now in your present. This law is not an instantaneous law. It never has been, and it never will be. There's a season for sowing and a season for reaping, but you can't do both in the same season. How do you plant these seeds? Well, a mentor of ours, Bob Proctor, had a great way to do this in his Born Rich program. He suggested that we change one thing in our business life, was that you are to be like this in front of somebody at 9 a.m. every morning. John Canary, who taught this course with Bob, went on to say that if you were to get up an hour earlier every day and spend an hour of every day practicing your craft to, say, your sales presentation, parenting skills, or maybe sharpen your people skills through personal development programs for just an hour every day, do you realize that at the end of the year you will have added 35.2 10-hour weeks to your schedule of education or development of some kind that can benefit you in your life in so many ways you wouldn't even imagine? I mean, think about it. If you had an extra 35 plus 10-hour weeks of practice, how amazing would that be? So sowing the seed of expanding your education, performance, parenting, or development now, what would your returns be when it's time to reap these rewards? Here are a few action tips for you to get started using this law today for a better tomorrow. We've already been over this one. Create an extra hour somewhere in your day to better yourself or your business formula. Use the same technique Brian Tracy suggests. He suggests we use the law of overcompensation. Overcompensate on everything you do. If you have a presentation to do, make it the most dynamic presentation you've ever done. In other words, go that extra mile on everything you do. In the next video, we're going to look at the law of influence. Your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. This is a great law. When you do things to help people, do you think about what you're going to get out of it, or do you put their interests first?